Hi.
Hey, how are you? I'm going to start.
Everyone. The meeting is being recorded. I hope that's okay with everybody. Can everybody see me and hear me okay? Yes, okay. My name is Meg Burns. I am an associate professor of TESOL and bilingual education in the Graduate School of Education at Lesley, and I'm also the program director for early childhood education. And on behalf of our early childhood programs, I just want to welcome you to our first Early Childhood Innovation Series workshop of the year. And we're really excited to have you all here. And we're thrilled to have our three presenters join us, and we're very grateful to them for joining us. And this workshop series is really near and dear to our hearts in the early childhood program. It's a wonderful chance for us to branch out beyond our students and make connections with a larger group of teachers and just welcome you all into the Lesley community for a couple hours. So thank you for being here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dana Bentley.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. I see a lot of familiar faces, and I'm really excited to have everyone here this evening. Just a few housekeeping things before we get started. Just so you all know, we are recording this session this evening. So if you prefer not to have your face or your voice recorded, feel free to just turn off your cameras. We also wanted to just remind people to mute if you're not speaking, and we really encourage you to put questions in the chat as we go along. We'll be harvesting those and then feeding them back to the presenters at the end of the presentation today. And they really are excited about fielding questions and having good conversations with everyone. So please ask questions and get engaged. And then yeah, I think that's all of the reminders. So to the presentation, welcome so much this evening to How to Be a Change Maker, a workshop on how to bring social justice into our educational settings. We all know how important it is to do this work. Knowing how to do this work is often the challenge as educators. Tonight, these leaders in our field will offer practical, hands-on applications of how to work with your school community to understand and implement anti-bias and anti-racist curriculum and conversations into your school settings. Victor will begin with his all-around framing of children as activists able to dismantle the inequities of their learning environments. He will address our fears as adults and how we move past those fears to become social justice educators. We will then hear from Iris and Lisa, who will share their recent publication, The Complementary Curriculum Approach, and how to use the framework with an anti-bias lens. In addition, Iris will share curriculum and strategies with examples from her preschool program to support considerations for your classrooms. As an early childhood teacher and parent myself, I am deeply grateful for the innovative work that these educators are doing and look forward to hearing more from them this evening. Briefly, I want to introduce we're going to be starting with Victor L. Bradley, who's an educational consultant, and then we'll be followed by the work from Dr. Lisa Q, another educational consultant, and Dr. Iris Chin-Ponte, a director and teacher of the Henry Frost Children's Program. Thank you all so much for being here. I just can't tell you how grateful I am, and I look forward to hearing more.
Okay, Victor, I'm going to need you to tell me if those black boxes are blocking you, okay?
Absolutely.
So let me, oh, this says trying to connect. Uh-oh. Okay, great.
Great.
Okay, how are we blocked by black
No, so
boxes?
far we're in good shape.
Okay, great.
Well, welcome everyone. I'm so thrilled to be here with all of you. This is a little bit about me, and what I want to do is just start by saying I've been doing this work for a while, and it's possible to do it and sort of weave it in and make it happen and make if you're a teacher, if you are even a parent, even if you are a director, this work is exciting and fun and really gets kids involved in their classrooms, their lives, and they become really caring people, and they really start to look across all different genres of human beings and really appreciate them as human. So that's how I just want to start. Next slide, please. Thank you. So me, I'll just do a little brief thing about me. I grew up in Connecticut in a small town near New York City called New Canaan. And I always wanted to do this work. I taught for over 30 years early child education, and during the pandemic, I switched careers and decided to do more of this work. And really, for me, it's always been my passion. And what I'm going to share with you today is some of the work that I've done and tell you about the things that have worked, the things that I've struggled with, the things that I've completely fell on my face and needed help and support, and the things that were huge successes. And I hope from today you will be able to adapt some of these and use them for yourself. I love sharing what I've done. I love you figuring out what makes sense for you by witnessing what I've done. And that's my hope for you. You can go to the next slide, please. So, like I said, I grew up in Connecticut, and I want to talk a little bit about me. I feel like I should share as much about me as possible. And I feel like if you do that as a teacher, it's really important to bring all of yourself into the classroom. So I identify as African American. I identify as Jewish. I found out Jewish heritage late in my life, and really just embraced it and ran with it. I grew up with two amazing African American parents in Connecticut, both working class in a very, very wealthy town. I often felt left out and felt like I didn't fit in at all. When I moved to Boston to go to Wheelock College, I came out as bisexual, and I also struggled with dyslexia my entire life. And that's always been a challenge for me, and still is today. But I feel like I need to put it out there that that's who I am. So people who maybe be struggling with some kind of disability and feel like they can't make it and can't do it, it's possible to be in education. It's possible to be teaching people and teaching teachers. I also was a DJ. For music got me through everything. All the challenges and struggles as being an African-American, Jewish, bisexual boy. Music always brought me courageousness and happiness. So next slide, please. So I like to start just by showing you, I'm not going to read through them because I'd like to show more slides than this. But I'd like to start with just sort of looking at the anti-bias education and what is anti-bias education. And so just glance at this. You will get a copy of this slideshow to keep for yourself. So some of the videos I'm not going to show today and some I will. So you'll have time to go back and look at these. So don't feel like you need to take notes. If things are being covered up right now, don't worry. You will get a copy of this. So this is just my sort of definition of anti-bias education. Next slide, please. Also, anti-racist education. This is also something that I like to have a definition here when I start any of my workshops, just so people get an idea, get a feeling of where we're going and what we should be looking at as people. Next slide, please. So there's research. When we're doing this work, when we're doing things around race, around gender, there's a lot of research that's been done, and it shows that children are not young. Children can really are noticing at a very young age differences and changes, and we need to give them answers for these. So I think it's really, really important to start having these conversations early when children are young and ask questions and be honest with them about it. Next slide, please. This is why I like this chart so much. And I feel like it really just breaks it down and talks about the research and talks about if we're silent around isms as educators, as parents, we're actually reinforcing the stereotypes and the racism. So we need to give children answers, developmentally appropriate answers. You might not have the answers right away. You may not know. The child may come to you and you go, I have no idea how to answer that. And that's okay. You can always tell them, I need to get back to you on that. I'm not really sure how to answer that. And that's an okay answer. And when you come back, they may be thirsty and excited and want to hear your answer. They may not be at the time, but it will come up again. Don't worry, it always does. Next slide, please. So change makers, that's what we're going to talk about today. How do we teach social studies, inclusion, and activism in early childhood. Next slide, please. So this changemaker curriculum that I sort of embraced and have taken on the road with me started as an alphabet with just people that we thought at this particular school that children need to learn about. It was very simple. People that maybe everyone pretty much knew their story. Martin Luther King Jr., everybody knows, right? And then we started to think differently. We're like, wow, so this is great. Maybe I was working at a Quaker school and we said, let's connect them to the Quaker testimonies, like peace. So we'll have a different person for each Quaker testimony. So children will actually connect these with big vocabulary words. So we started thinking more about, so we're doing all these great people, but these people are known. Let's start to look for people who are in our classroom, maybe, that represent. Let's look for people maybe people don't know about. Maybe we'll look at people like Baird Rustin, who actually is friends of Martin Luther King Jr., who organized the Mouse on Washington. Maybe we don't know who Baird Rustin is. So we started to branch out more and more and more and changing the name. And sort of now it's sort of landing on change makers. First was people of inspiration, all kinds of names. You can name it anything you'd like. But I think the most important thing is sort of embracing these people that you will be learning about with young children. You get to learn who they are. So that's what I'm going to sort of do today, is sort of talk about how do you do that? And how do you bring these people into your room in a developmentally appropriate way? Next slide, please. So when I'm talking about a certain person, I want to explain what was going on at the time. What part of the country are we talking about? What part of the world are we talking about? What was the environment? Where did the person live? Was it in a city? Was it in the country? Was it in a rural area? Was it in a farm? Did the person grow up in this country? So for this particular person that I'm going to talk about right now, I'm going to talk about Ruby Bridges. And Ruby Bridges grew up in New Orleans, in a place where things were segregated. So you have to sort of have that conversation first and talk about what is segregation. So the first thing I would show is showing images and pictures, having conversations about separate restrooms. I also share stories about my parents who grew up in New Jersey. They actually had separate places where they couldn't sit in the movie theater. They had to sit in the balcony. They couldn't sit in the orchestra seats. And they were in New Jersey in the 1950s, the 1940s, and 1930s. So this is not just happening in the South or New Orleans. It's happening other places too. Next slide, please. I like to use book images. I like to use other images. I love these images this is actually taken from a book, a board book about Martin Luther King Jr. And it shows him looking at the water fountain. It shows him looking at the restaurant that they can't eat in. It shows the two separate water fountains. Next slide, please. This is one of my favorite images in this particular book because it shows children having a really good time on both slides or in both pictures. But as you can see, there's definitely differences in how the playgrounds are. And we can talk about this. This is still going on today, that in certain places, there's really nice playgrounds. In certain places, maybe the nice playgrounds aren't as nice and the equipment is falling apart and not taken care of. Next slide, please. When talking about Ruby Bridges, I like to talk about what's going on right now and that there has been some progress. And that if Ruby Bridges hadn't decided, her family hadn't decided to send her to an all-white school and try to integrate the schools, Kamala Harris probably wouldn't be our vice president right now. So making those kinds of connections. I also like to emphasize that things did work out. Ruby Bridges did end up at school after a year of no one coming to school. That she actually did make friends. Next slide, please. I also like to share lots of different kinds of books. There are many books about Ruby Bridges. My favorite is The Story of Ruby Bridges to share with children by Robert Coles, because Robert Coles was actually there when things were happening. Robert Coles experienced Ruby Bridges, and we're going to watch a video about him later. about his experiences with Ruby Bridges and what he experienced with the family. But all the books are great. And Ruby Bridges, you know, next slide, please. Ruby Bridges is still alive today. And that's another thing I like to connect. I like this picture of the marshals walking Ruby Bridges, and children often ask, like, why did she need to have police officers or marshals or guards walking her to and from school? And I said, because it wasn't safe. People were that upset and that angry that she was going to school, and the law had changed, and people don't like change. People get nervous about change. People get scared about change. And I have that conversation with children about that maybe sometimes, do you get scared about change sometimes? And they usually agree. They don't like change either. Well, these adults didn't like change either. I also talk about that these were actually the the president's police force. There were marshals, the policemen's marshals. And I like to talk to children about that. And people say, well, why couldn't the police officers in the local town protect her, make her safe? And there were a lot of reasons for that. One reason was just that maybe they didn't agree that Ruby should be going to school. Or maybe they were just scared too. Next slide, please. Another shot of Ruby when she finally, kids could come back to school and join her. Next slide, please. I love also this picture of Ruby Bridges meeting President Barack Obama and seeing the picture of her, a painting by Norman Rockwell of her. And it really, we're going to see a video about her talking about that a little bit later. And she will come to schools. She will come and talk to you. She will come and read the books. So children can actually touch history. Children can actually be and ask Ruby questions. Next slide, please. This is Barbara Henry. This is Ruby's teacher. And they actually reunited on the Oprah Winfrey Show back in the 90s. And Barbara Henry actually lives locally. She lives in West Roxbury still today. Next slide, please. I was fortunate to meet her back in 2013, and she was able to come to our school. And she was able to answer Chris's questions about Ruby Bridges. And that's what she actually was educated here in Boston. She grew up here in Boston. So having kids make associations with a child in New Orleans, a teacher in Boston, connected. These are all real people, real live living people. Next slide, please. So now I want to show, I have a lot of videos, but I'm not going to show them today just because of time, and you will get to watch them on your own. But there are two I would like to spotlight. One is by Robert Coles, and I want to apologize that there are hard images in this video, and I would not show this to children. I would show this to teachers and adults, so they get a picture of what it was like to be at that school when Ruby would be going to school every day for a year, and there was an angry mob there every single day. I'm also going to show the video about Ruby Bridges and just her speaking now as an adult and what it was like for her. There's also a great video about Ruby's mom. I'm not going to show it today, and a longer video by Barbara Henry talking about her experiences as well. So we're going to start. There may be a little, so might be an ad might come up or something, but we'll see if everything works out. Video is always tricky.
New Orleans was aflame with racial
How's it looking, everyone? Okay.
It looks great.
Okay.
hate and street violence. They were trying to desegregate 2 elementary schools. This little girl was ordered by a federal judge to go into one of them. And she was there all by herself. The whole white population had boycotted the school. No other children with her. And I happened to see this little child going into a school in New Orleans at the age of 6 to the 1st grade. I thought to myself, I would like to know that child. I'd like to know what's happening to her. One day, having now spent months getting to know Ruby and being rather puzzled at how normal and stoic and strong she was, going through this kind of living hell. 200 people waiting at 8:30 in the morning to tell her they were going to kill her. 200 people in the afternoon telling her they were going to kill her. 25 federal marshals taking her into that building. What would you expect? You'd expect that a child going through that would pretty soon start developing symptoms and be in trouble. I waited and waited, and there weren't any symptoms, and she kept going and learning and being the Ruby that she was, a normal 6-year-old black child, very poor background. Parents didn't even know how to read and write. Humble people. One day her school teacher said to me, she'd been looking out of the window, and she saw Ruby yet again coming to school. This time she watched carefully, and she noticed that as Ruby was walking past this mob of heckling men and women, she stopped. And the teacher saw her lips moving. I said, Ruby, your teacher told me today that she saw you talking to those people in the street. She said to me, Doctor, I told her that I wasn't talking to the people. I said, well, who were you talking to, Ruby? She said, I told her I was talking to God.
Could you tell us, tell our audience why you took them out?
Because I didn't want them to go to school with the niggas.
Why were you praying to God? She said, I was praying for the people in the street. I said, why were you doing that, Ruby? And she said, well, because I wanted to pray for them. I said, you did want to pray for them? Yes, she said. I said, Ruby, why would you want to pray for those people? And then she looked at me and her eyes widened and she said, well, don't you think they need praying for? That stopped me cold. Where did she get that idea, Ruby? She said, well, my mommy and daddy have told me that, and the minister told me that in church. She said, I pray for them every morning, and I pray for them every afternoon when I go home.
I say for the mothers to keep their kids out of school, all together. We're white people. We don't want them to go to school with niggas. I have 5, and they not going to school with no niggas.
And I said, Ruby, those people are so mean to you. And they're so nasty to you. You must have some other feelings toward them besides wanting to pray for them. She said, I just keep praying for them, and I just hope that God will be good to them. I said, what do you say in the prayer, Ruby? I always say the same thing. What's that, Ruby? Well, I always say, please, dear God, forgive them because they don't know what they're doing. Now, I'd heard that someplace before, and I heard it in that kitchen, in that extremely impoverished house, and it silenced me. I had no more questions to ask. Here is a child whom we learned in the 60s to say that she came from a culturally disadvantaged and a culturally deprived home. They were illiterate, her parents, and yet they had taught her biblical truths in a way that she was to live them out. I'd like to see some of us who have fancy educations bring up our children similarly. Do we? I'm not so sure we do. They hadn't read any of these books in childhood. They didn't know anything about this or that stage of moral or psychosexual development. But boy, they knew how to bring up a child in such a way that she could call upon the statements that Jesus called upon, and Isaiah and Jeremiah and Amos. They had memorized in their minds, in church, whole passages from the Old and New Testament, and they tried to live it out. And it would be nice if some of us would try to live things out, not only get an A in biblical literature, or an A in moral analysis, or an A in Southern history, but to get the kind of A Ruby got.
Awesome. Thank you. So Robert Coles lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts still. He's over 90. And he's a child psychologist. And he tracked Ruby. And he found out that, I love having that conversation with children that, like, not everyone believes in God and not everybody goes to church, but for Ruby, this worked. This worked for her and her family. And this is where she got her power and her strength from. Now I'd like to watch the Ruby Bridges video, if possible. Thank you so much.
I was one of 4 6-year-old children, girls, to integrate the public school system here in New Orleans in 1960. Well, being 6 and not really understanding what was going on at the time during the civil rights movement. My parents didn't explain anything to me. I always say to people that it would be really, really hard to explain to a 6-year-old child what I was about to encounter going to school that day. So the only thing that they said to me is that you are going to go to a new school and you better behave. And that was the extent of it. So I had absolutely no idea what was happening at the time. I began to realize how important my walk through those doors back in 1960 was in probably about the 80s. I was, I believe, 17 or 18 years old when I was asked to do an interview, and the reporter showed me a copy of the Norman Rockwell painting. Even though I was accustomed to looking at old magazines and Eyes on the Prize and seeing all that footage, I understood that it was important, but it didn't really hit me until I saw the Norman Rockwell painting. And I realized that it wasn't something that just happened in New Orleans, but it was something that people all across the country, all across the world actually recognized, especially through the painting. And I always say that the lesson I took away was a lesson that Dr. King tried to teach all of us. And that was that we should never look at a person and judge them by the color of their skin. That is the lesson that I learned in that classroom at 6 years old, simply because I crossed a picket line, a mob every day for a whole year. They were all white, screaming, yelling, threatening to harm me. And yet every day when I entered the building, there was a woman there to greet me, and she was also white. And I remember not really knowing what to expect from her, if she was going to be exactly like the people outside. But she did everything she could to make my day filled with fun. And I loved learning. She not only taught me, but she read stories to me. We played games and we did music and everything, to the point that I never missed a day that whole year. I knew that if I got past the mob and inside of the building, I was going to have a great day. And it was because of her. So she showed me her heart. And I began to realize that there was no way she was like the people outside. I couldn't judge her the same way. And so I believe at that moment, I learned the lesson that Dr. King died trying to teach us. And that is, as I said, you cannot look at a person and judge them by the color of their skin. That shaped me into who I am today.
Thank you. So I often show that video to young children, and they love that video. They're transfixed. It's like they've met Ruby Bridges after that. They'll go home and tell their parents, like, we met Ruby Bridges today. She came to our class. It's really powerful. I love that she's just very honest about what it was like for her. And I like, people really do, especially young children, love the story of Ruby Bridges because it is a victory. And also she was a kid. She was a kid that helped to change laws. And that's really powerful, that young people can actually do big, big changes. All right, next slide, please. So I like to make the connection between Ruby Bridges and Thurgood Marshall. Thurgood Marshall was the first Black Supreme Court justice, and he was just so powerful. The Supreme Court was all white men, and it was him pushing through civil rights, pushing through the law that got Ruby Bridges to actually go to that school. So I like making those connections with children. And there are great books about him too. And he was quite a character when he was a kid. He was not this great student, he struggled, and he struggled with, being a class clown. And his dad would take him to courthouses, and he'd watch debates. And because his dad actually did the cleaning at that particular courthouse. So he would take him and say, watch this. And he would debate with him at the dining room table. And he had teachers that, instead of sending him to detention or putting him out of class, they'd send him to the library to read, because they knew he was smart, even though he was struggling so hard to be in class. So his world was set up for him to be a Supreme Court justice. Next slide, please. So fast forwarding, now we have Sonia Sotomayor, the first Latinx woman to be on the Supreme Court. And her story is also quite amazing. She grew up with a single mom because her dad passed away when she was really young, and she's diabetic, childhood diabetic. So these are big challenges, and she's still a Supreme Court justice. So really, really powerful. Next slide, please. I love this because, as you can see, the Supreme Court looks really different than it looked when Thurgood Marshall was there. So I like also showing children that things are changing. I also love this picture of Kamala Harris putting her hand on the Bible that was Thurgood Marshall's Bible, and actually Sonia Sotomayor got to swear her in. So things that have just gone full circle. So really, really powerful in telling that story. And there are lots of great books about Sonia Sotomayor as well. Next slide, please. So Cesar Chavez is somebody I learned about, and I really wanted to do something big with him, and I couldn't quite figure it out for many years. And I could see, like, because he did boycotts and all these things, and it was really powerful. And, I grew up knowing about not eating grapes at one point in my life, and I really wanted to bring that in the classroom, but I didn't know how to do it. Next slide, please. So then I found out about Dolores by reading this book Side by Side, and found out that actually she was the one that held Cesar Chavez up. And she was the one that helped him think about Cesar Puedes, Yes We Can, which Barack Obama actually used for his campaign. And thank goodness she stayed alive long enough to be honored by Barack Obama. And really, she is the underpinning of a lot of the protesting that Cesar Chavez did. But because of sexism, we don't know about Dolores. So now I always teach them in simultaneously together. Next slide, please. So I kept, doing more research about what I could do. How can I do some more activism with Cesar Chavez? And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But really, I just kept really wanting to do something with him. His name kept coming up. Dolores' name kept coming up. And I'll tell you what I did with that later. So next slide, please. Malala, this is a beautiful book by Malala, by the way, The Magic Pencil. I also love talking about her with young children because she continues to fight so girls can go to school. In our country, girls can go to school, most likely, and have that privilege. But in a lot of countries, girls can't. And I think it's important for children to know that in a lot of places, they're not allowed. And there are lots of different stories on why. So next slide, please. Pete Seeger is often played in my classroom, like, all the time. Like, I grew up listening to Pete Seeger. I met Pete Seeger when I was 3, but I don't remember it. But I didn't sort of bring his social justice action until later in my teaching career, and just sort of taught that he was this amazing activist around civil rights, around the environment, about climate change. Really, really powerful person. Next slide, please. There are also great books about him. Many people only know him by Abiyoyo, that story, but he has a whole bunch of books that he has out, and his story is quite fantastic. Next slide, please. Winona LaDuke, the first Indigenous Native American woman to run for president. She also helped to influence the book We Are the Water Protectors. And she's an activist now, talking about pipelines and things that run through reservations that shouldn't be. So I also love teaching about her. Next slide, please. Patsy Mink, who I just discovered pretty much late in my teaching career. She was the first Congresswoman of color in Congress, and was really powerful. Not many people know about her. I love talking about her because now people do. There are great books about her coming out daily, and she's amazing. Next slide, please. Community action. So here we go. So I'm doing all this great stuff and talking about all these people, but I really still want to do this community action stuff. So next slide, please. So I started with just thinking about my community, and I often went to the fire station. I often did, I went to the police station. I did all these community things that all early child teachers do, but I really want to do something more. And so I started to do some research, and I found out about this guy named Mel King. Next slide, please. And I heard about all this work he'd done in Boston. He'd run for mayor. He had done all this cool stuff, and had built fair housing, really fought for a lot of social justice work here in the city. And so I got to meet him through a dear friend, and we had like a nice lunch together. And I was like, would you come to our school? Because we're learning about community helpers, and you are an active community helper. And he came. Next slide, please. He came, and we got to ask him questions. He got to talk about all his community action. And it was just really, really fun to have an actual person come to our school. And then we got to think about what can we do to have some action as well. Next slide, please. What can we do to help the community? So fast forward a couple years later, I was working at a school with a university attached to it. And we were, again, looking at Cesar Chavez. And we found out that Wendy's was doing a really not great job with getting their produce. In fact, they were getting non-union produce, and every other fast food chain had sort of caved and decided to get union produce at their fast food chain. But Wendy's still they'd been the holdout. So I found out these farmers were actually having protests about this. So I told the children about it. We wrote to Wendy's to ask them why this is still happening. This is not okay. And Cesar Chavez, and we decided we were going to boycott Wendy's the way Cesar Chavez boycotted the grapes. And we were going to tell everybody in school about it. We were going to tell everybody in the university about it. We were going to walk around to the professors' offices. We were just going to tell everyone. And that's what we did. And something really big happened. So after we did that, I was watching the news over the weekend after we had done that. And some college students from that university went to Wendy's and staged a protest. They were so upset when they heard about this. And they were so upset that young children knew about it and they didn't. So with that, I went back and told the children that, and of course they all wanted to go to Wendy's the next day. And I said, no, we're not going to go to Wendy's, but we can write to Wendy's again. We can tell everybody we know about this and just stay really strong. And there are many stories. So fast forward a couple years later, Wendy's now, I've heard, has actually caved, and now they actually get unionized produce, particularly their tomatoes. That was the big problem. So I got to tell the children that they had made people know about this, and they felt really powerful, like being able to do this work and really just be there and really just inform adults that this was a big problem. Next slide, please. Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. If you don't know who they are, you will now. They are the ones that sort of began the gay pride movement that we know of today, and that we know all the work that was done. The first gay pride parade was a riot, and now it's turned into a parade. These trans women were the beginning of it, trans women of color. And at that time, they were not even a term, trans women of color, when they started this movement. But they did. They stood up and they fought back for 4 days. And so there are many stories coming out about them, and it's important to know their story. Next slide, please. Harvey Milk, an amazing human being who was the first government official who was out as a gay person in San Francisco. Sadly, he was assassinated. But there's a beautiful book about him and about how he created the rainbow flag with this other gentleman. And I love making the correlation between him and Martin Luther King Jr., who had big dreams, big dreams. And even though someone tried to stop their dreams by killing them and hurting them, their dream didn't fade. It continued on. So I love telling that version, even though it's tragic and it's hard. I love talking about that. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through pretty quickly now, just sort of showing you some of the things. So this is just some of this more social justice action stuff I did. I marched in the Gay Pride Parade with kids. I did a virtual Pride with kids. This is all stuff that we sort of created and built up and made sure I always had Pride books or gender books in my classroom at all times, not just in June. I could expand on this all the time. And we learned about Baird Rustin, which we're going to talk about a little bit. Next slide, please. More images of the Pride parades that we marched in multiple schools that I worked at. Next slide, please. Also, this is Gilbert Baker. He's the creator of the rainbow flag, and he was friends of Harvey Milk. And that's why we have a pride flag. And now we have multiple pride flags, which is great too. I like to point out that this challah was made by a parent who, it was Shabbat, and they wanted to bring in a rainbow challah in Pride Month, and that was great too. Next slide, please. So when I'm talking about activism, I want to talk about Greta too. You know, she's a kid and she's really pushed up against adults in a way to make climate change be in the center. And now, you know, we can't hide it now, but she was talking about before the weather even went crazy this summer. Next slide, please. I also love talking about Wangari Maathai. There are beautiful, gorgeous books about Wangari, and she was actually she won the Nobel Peace Prize back in 2014, and just has done amazing activism and climate change work in Kenya by planting trees, because all the trees have been cut down to build factories. So when I talk about environment, I like to talk about her. Next slide, please. I also like to talk about that Barack Obama and her were friends, and she was from Kenya and his dad was from Kenya, and making those connections. And we're talking about the people, we're talking about all the different environments where they came from. I love talking about the continent of Africa and how gigantic it is, right? And how we can fit different countries and continents inside of Africa. So next slide, please. Just also showing a lot of times in a map, the United States is shown as the biggest image on a map or a globe, and that is not the case as we see here. Next slide, please. If I had time, I'm not gonna show the slide because I'm running short on time, but please watch this video. It's 2 minutes long. It's about Wangari and how this hummingbird just is amazing and just keeps putting out this fire, even though with drops of water where all the other animals are terrified. So every little bit counts. Everybody, you know, can take on a big thing and be hopeful. That's sort of what it's the premise, but you can watch that on your own. Next slide, please. So highlighting during Black History Month, many people highlight many African-American people. I like to sort of highlight LGBTQ people as well. So keeping that in mind when we're talking about Black History Month. And here are a few that I just sort of will share with you very quickly. Next slide, please. Thank you. Marsha P. Johnson, obviously. Like I said, there are more books coming out. Next slide, please. Baird Rustin, who was basically the organizer for Martin Luther King Jr., organized the March on Washington, but a lot of help and support to Martin Luther King Jr. We're learning more and more about Baird Rustin, and there are great books about him too. Next slide, please. Baird Rustin identified as gay, and that's why we don't know who Baird Rustin is, because he sadly had to keep that hidden, but was able to come out in the 70s and 80s and be himself. Next slide, please. Janelle Monáe, I love talking about current people and people that are actually alive and well and in our world, and sharing those stories as well. And she was also in Hidden Figures, the movie, and also is a great artist and performer. Next slide, please. Alvin Ailey also left his legacy of dance for African heritage people and for everyone all over the world, showing that African heritage people can be dancers and professional dancers who were shunned from ballet and other forms of dance. Alvin Ailey created his own dance crew, which is you can go see today. And if you haven't seen them, I highly recommend it. He also suffered from autism and mental health. And I like to share that as well, because with all that challenges he still went through. Next slide, please. So how can you include social studies inclusion and activism in a child's lives? I hope you sort of have seen how we can do that and sort of have an idea. I have a few more slides to show, and then I'm going to hand it over. Andrea Faye Hendricks, and I liked it. It's a sort of, I'm connecting sort of books and people. She was sort of the youngest marcher, it's called, and she was this kid who actually decided she wanted to go to jail for civil rights to help fill up the jails. Amazing story. Next slide, please. And so I did these very quick descriptions with questions because people ask me a lot, like, so Victor, I have these great books. I don't know what to do with them. So I took the description, and so people would have know what they're getting to, and then have some guided questions that you can ask children, or you can sort of have in your head as you're reading the book. So I'm just going to glide through these people. Next slide, please. Claudette Colvin was actually the first person to actually sort of stage a bus boycott, but you don't know about her because she was 15 and pregnant. So her story is just coming out now. But she's actually before Rosa Parks actually did that first. Next slide, please. Abraham Joshua Herschel is also a person I like to talk about. He was a rabbi who worked side by side with Martin Luther King Jr. Many people don't know about his story either. So I like talking about him as well and their friendship. Next slide, please. And there's a great book called As Good as It Gets. As anybody, sorry. Next slide, please. So I've tracked my children a little bit, and during the pandemic, some of my children got together and they actually formed an activist group and have a t-shirt business conference. That's what this website is. And all the money goes to homeless people. So next slide, please. I also did a Changemaker online class as well, which I really enjoyed. Next slide, please, during the pandemic. And then I've also tracked these two students of mine who I also taught, and they actually their art was spotlighted in Arlington for about a month during Black History Month. It was amazing. Next slide, please. This is also a great video to watch on your own. It talks about a classroom who didn't give up and were really, really, really active about having everyone be able to use the playground. There were many students in the school that were in wheelchairs and they couldn't use the playground. So they went to businesses, they went to restaurants, they went to large corporations, said, we need to have a playground for these children. And they won, they did it. And so it's a beautiful video. It's like 4 minutes long. Next slide, please. I'll just go through this really quickly. Changemaker street artist. It's another thing that I did. Next slide, please. Go next slide, please. Next slide, please. This is some of we sort of changed our classroom into an art studio one year, and it was fantastic. And we got to see, we had parents come in, we had an art opening, we had a shoe museum, we did the whole thing and got to do social studies through art. It was wonderful. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And then we got to go to the MFA because the Frida Kahlo exhibit was in town. Next slide, please. So that's what I got. Sorry I had to rush towards the end, but you can review these slides on your own. Please, please, please reach out to me anytime. I'd love to come to your school. I'd love to have conversations with you. I'm going to pass it over to the next crew. Thank you so much.
Victor, thank you so much. Your enthusiasm is just infectious as a teacher, and I've been frantically requesting books from the library as you went through your slides. So we will be sharing the presentation with the attendees as well. And now we're really excited to turn it over to Dr. Lisa Q and Dr. Iris Chinpante, who are going to tell us a little bit about their work, where they're coming from, and then this incredible curriculum that they have been sharing. And I can't remember when the book came out, but recently, and we're excited to hear more from you all. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Iris, and I'm so happy to be with all of you today. I'm currently the director and classroom teacher at the Henry Frost Children's Program in Belmont, Massachusetts, so very local. And I know all of you have probably been in classrooms and are exhausted. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to be engaging and helpful in our presentation.
Hi, I'm Lisa Q. I'm the former director of early education for Somerville Public Schools, but am now living in and consulting from Seattle, Washington. I'm so glad to be back in New England virtually. And Iris and I actually met when we were both teaching at the Elliott Pearson Children's School, and both have connections with Lesley. So it's really a pleasure to be here. So I just thank you so much, Victor, for the content, and I hope everyone will see the connection to our own work. And our objective tonight is, through a really compelling case study that Iris is going to present from her school, is to link anti-bias education theory and practice that rest on some high leverage intentions that we hope you'll be able to put into use right away, or come back and talk with us another time, so that we can help you with your work. So we wanted to start out with the NAEYC position statement, and I'll just read it and let it sink in a bit. All children have the right to equitable learning opportunities that help them achieve their full potential as engaged learners and valued members of society. Thus, all early childhood educators have a professional obligation to advance equity. And what this position statement does is highlights the importance of equitable learning opportunities. So when we provide children with access to really meaningful learning experiences in our classrooms, we actually help them and their families develop a sense of identity in a diverse society. And our schools have to support children to be proud of themselves and their families, to respect a range of human differences and recognize unfairness, and to speak up for others. And in order to do this, teachers need a deep repertoire of practice. So when we bridge theory and practice, it builds a greater understanding of how we can implement an anti-bias stance in our work. And I'm going to talk more specifically about the anti-bias goals, but let me talk a little bit about the work that Iris and I have done first to make that connection. So next slide, please. So the book complementary curriculum approach really came out of our own practices as early childhood educators. We were working together and noticing things about each other's practices and what was happening with children and teachers. And we knew that we wanted to help support teachers to have a classroom that felt settled, where children were engaged, where there was joy in learning, where there was inherent equity in everything that happened. And we began presenting our ideas at workshops and conferences, and we realized that the practices we were implementing in our own teaching were very integrated, that brought balance and complemented a range of approaches. It didn't matter if you were teaching in a Montessori environment or a Reggio environment, or used creative curriculum or high scope, that the high leverage practices that we're going to talk about helped bring this framework that provided teachers with the guidance and strategies they needed to really work with children in a meaningful way. So it's really rooted in 4 intentions that I'm going to tell you about, and it supports the child's right to learn in an environment that's responsive to them and differentiates according to children's needs. So when it comes to anti-bias education, we have to examine our own intentions in the same way that Victor was saying we have to examine our own identity. So who are we as people, and who are we as teachers? So next slide, please. So here are the 4 anti-bias education goals. Hopefully this isn't the very first time you're seeing them, but if it is, we encourage you to go to the literature, do some more reading, and to look at the anti-bias leaders video on Debbie Lee Keenan and John Nimmo's website. And maybe we can add some links to that later, because I think it's important work for folks for whom this is new. But it's important to note, and Iris will be talking about these as she goes through the case study, so we want you to listen for these anti-bias goals. So the first goal is around identity, and this is where children are starting to understand self-awareness. They do this from a very young age, and develop the confidence, family pride, and that positive social identity. The diversity goal is really about understanding, for in early childhood terms, same and different. How do I use accurate language to talk about human differences? And how do I form deep, caring human connections across all dimensions of diversity? And you can start to hear the beginnings of empathy in that one. Oh, you and I have some things that are the same. We have some things that are different. And now I am going to start to develop some language to describe things around me. And that's where it moves into the justice goal. I have language to describe unfairness, and in the examples that Victor gave you, you can see children developing that language through learning about a variety of histories and understanding that unfairness hurts. It's something that really resonates with young children. And then the fourth goal is about demonstrating a sense of empowerment and the skills to act with others or alone against prejudice, against discrimination. And an effective anti-bias education program daily practices these goals. They're not just something, oh, today we're going to study about identity and now we're going to go on and do math. It's actually integrated into everything that you do. And any of these goals, they're not necessarily hierarchical, although talking with children about identity and diversity is a good place to start, and a place where children have an understanding of who they are. So it's an entry point for a variety of work. So let's talk briefly about the 4 intentions. Next slide, please. So in a bit, when Iris presents the case study, we also want you to be listening for these intentions of complementary curriculum. And this again came out of our work. So I'm going to review them as a whole, and then I'll give you a few very brief examples. The first intention is around compelling materials. This is really about the design of what we offer children so that we're inspiring curiosity. We're doing it in a culturally responsive way. And there's some both experimentation and exploration, and some built-in success strategies for children to be able to access the work that they're doing. The second intention is around explicit presentation. So this is where we have that modeling for children. It could be self-care routines, how to use a material, but it's really the adult's practice of using materials and demonstrating them so children have some independence and confidence as they go through their day. Responsive scaffolding is the way that teachers move in and out. It's those questions. Does the child really need help? I've got to observe and assess that. All right, they're good. I can move back. What am I going to say in this particular opportunity? It's really about scaffolding learning. And the final one is about following children's interests. Are you following the interests that the children are telling you that they want to do? Are they able to choose things in the environment? And while we're not going to go into project approach today, there's certainly a way that following children's interest is rooted in the notion of big ideas and being able to study things for an extended period of time. You'll hear that certainly in Iris's example. So the intentions are intentionally flexible, actually, and can be applied across approaches. So bridging theory and practice is a place where sometimes teachers can get a bit stuck. And without an understanding of some of these key practices, our goals for children aren't realized. And when it comes to anti-bias, we have to examine those intentions so that we can meet children's needs. So let's just take a peek at the intentions to give you some groundwork. And next slide, please. So let's do a little thinking together. How are choices offered for children in your classroom? And what does child-led learning look like? Do your kids have time to tinker, to explore? And what's the modeling look like? These are questions that you might want to engage in with your colleagues at your school or with your own peers about children's rights to engage in meaningful learning experiences. So maybe some of you have seen spaces like this. What message does it send to children? And for us, the 4 intentions are really grounded in this idea of the prepared environment. Now, we're not going to do a whole presentation on that now, but are happy to talk with people more about the prepared environment and how important it is to set the tone for children's learning. But if the environment, how it looks, how it feels, how it's arranged, is directly linked to how kids feel at school. How the materials are offered makes a difference in how kids feel at school. So if we can support their independent and productive access to materials, it actually means that we can take more time to dig into these meaty topics and questions and discussions rather than just managing the use of materials and how kids use them. So what might children need in order to manage their spaces? It's kind of overwhelming when I see a picture like this. And so I'm thinking about, what do adults need to do to curate that? Next slide. You know, sometimes as early childhood educators, we don't want to say no. We want children to have access to many, many things in the name of exploration and discovery, but it can actually interfere with the ability to engage children in important conversations. And with a less is more attitude, we've seen teachers rein in, and I'll show you what this looks like in a moment, and ask themselves, is what I'm offering a distraction or is it an exploration? Sometimes it's a little of both, but if it leans on the distraction side, the children are not going to be engaged in the way that we would hope they would in terms of their learning experiences. So let's go to the next slide, please. So many of us use center time as a mainstay of our classroom environments, and that's a beautiful way to put things out. But if we think back to the last slide, the materials are just sort of offered in massive quantities, which can overwhelm children, especially children managing self-regulation and their own emotions. And so we are advocating through this idea of compelling materials, compelling provocations to pare down things. Here they're studying about beads and thinking about hexagons. Where do they appear in nature? How do the cells in beehives fit together? There's little teeny tiny beads there to play with. So that's one way to pare down how you're offering materials to provide a bit more structure. There's also another way, next slide, something we call tray work, lovingly. And it might seem like, oh my gosh, this is so structured, may seem closed to you, but actually it opens up an entire world as a child has the materials that they can manage, builds their confidence, they're successful, usually used by one, two, or three children. It's not a massive group of children all vying for materials, sometimes hoarding, not sharing. So hard for kids. Of course, we want them to learn that, but it can be a struggle as they are also learning many other things and have a huge cognitive load around materials and how they access them. And so being able to be successful in a small way can go a long way to helping children have an experience where they can really learn who they are. And that's really about that goal of identity, and then being able to be in community with others helps us with that goal of diversity. So when we are offering these materials, when our spaces are really congruent with the needs of children and their families, we really establish mutual trust and respect. And that's the foundation we need to bring social justice into our settings. Next slide. So here's a little bit. This is actually a photo from Iris's school. And it's what a shelf setup could look like that promotes choice. These materials are available for children at all times of the day, many times of the day. And every decision you make as an educator has the potential to impact equity in your program. And we keep this alive by keeping that long-term social justice vision and mission in the foreground while managing day-to-day immediate needs in our classrooms. So the social justice work isn't something we're just tacking on, but we're making it part of our program culture, our policies, our curriculum. And one way to do this is through offering children choice, that they actually have the right to make choices in the environment of things that are interesting for them to do. Next slide. So once the environment's prepared and children have been shown how to access the materials, they start to function as a community of learners. And when that happens, it's not just about kindness, but it's about being able to speak up for each other, which we'll hear about in a bit. Next slide. So the second intention is about explicit presentation. This is about the practice of intentionally naming and showing children how to use things. It doesn't mean that it's curbing creativity. It's just about, how do I give a lesson on an entire cycle of activity so a child can take something out, do it, explore, and put it away. Now, what happens in many schools is when children are not given shown how to use materials successfully, they misuse them, and I'm going to say that in quotes in the eyes of adults, and they risk being labeled destructive. Now, explicit presentation, because we're intentionally offering usage and steps and help, helps children to have that sense of themselves and be able to be successful with materials. Center time can go awry. So if I'm forced to stay at a center for a long time when I'm not interested, or a short time when I actually want more time to play, that's an anti-bias issue. That's an issue of not meeting children's needs. So when we consider how we model, children can make choices and they can use materials with care. They have control. We're actually offering them the opportunity to experience empathy, fairness, related to their multiple identities, and we build that bridge. Next slide. And you can do that modeling at any time, here to there. How do I walk across the room? How do I use loose parts, my block area? How do I ask a friend if I want to play? How do I interrupt politely? How do I take care of my environment? How do we solve classroom problems? The boots are being left all over. How are we going to do that? Let me show you how they should look and be lined up at the door. And then common materials and play experiences and those routines. So everything can be modeled. Next slide. So responsive scaffolding is about how and when we offer support that builds on the power of play and relationships. If we don't understand how to do that and set kids up for success, then they're not going to have full access to play experiences. So we have to observe children's play very carefully and take note of what's working for children and what's not working for children. Then we have to make those decisions about how we're going to support it. But it's more than just support. It's actually permission to teach with intention, to go to that place in that hard conversation or a topic that seems risky. It can be coaching each other as adults. We scaffold each other and we help children to work with peers, to play, to learn new skills. It's how you move in and out of a child's experience that matters. And it's within the context of the relationship that you build and that deep listening. It's part of the art of teaching. Teachers always ask us, like, when do I do responsive scaffolding? Oh, am I doing it now and not over here? No, it's happening all day long on the playground, at lunch. It can happen with individual children. It can happen with the whole class. You're going to determine, and it's closely linked actually to explicit presentation in how do I get you started on something, then move back, observe what's happening, and then maybe move back in. So it requires us to be responsive to children's needs. All right, let's go to the next slide. And then finally, following children's interests is key to the work. When we follow their interests, or actually the interests of one child, it doesn't have to be, oh, we're going to do this because the majority is interested in it. It could be that there's something going on in your room that needs addressing, and that a child's needs may or may not be met. And so you and your colleagues decide that we're going to actually do some study around something that feels like an important topic. When we engage in these kinds of high leverage instructional practices that enable teachers to plan based on children's strengths, we create agency and equity in our learning environments. So I'm going to turn it over to Iris to delve into the case study and hope that you'll keep these 4 anti-bias goals around identity, diversity, justice, and action, and the 4 intentions around compelling materials, explicit presentation, responsive scaffolding, and following children's interests in mind.
Great. Everyone's still awake. So I just wanted to say that, in thinking about our work in classrooms, and now I'm going to move you into a situation in my school that unfolded in 2021. I just wanted to stop and pause and note that for all of us educators, especially what we've taken on over the past few years, it's really easy to avoid hard or scary or challenging conversations in our classroom. But often those conversations are the most important ones. And I hope that in complementary curriculum approach and thinking about anti-bias goals, we give you almost a way to kickstart a sequence with those 4 intentions. How can we utilize them into your own classrooms so that you can take these things on? Because there's a lot happening in our world right now. And it's like, oh, can't we just watercolor the leaves? It would be so much easier, right? But the actual work we need to take on and do is big. And these foundations are critical. So with that said, you're going to see some images of my school when we pivoted 100% outside during COVID when this case study happened. So you can admire the wood chipped playground, the mask wearing, the socially distanced seating, and we were still trying our best to make it happen, just to give you some context of the images that you're seeing. All right, story time. Are we ready? So in the spring, yes, spring, you can still see the hats are on. It was still probably, I don't know, 40 degrees, 30 degrees out, feeling kind of warmer. Our students had access to loose art materials, and one of our students created a game in which the turtle was searching for their identity. Specifically, the turtle was rejecting the pronouns he, him, and wanting the pronouns she, her. This game inspired other children to make their own turtles and think about what pronouns their turtles would use. And so by extension, naturally, the children started to consider their own pronoun use. So teachers in my school, despite everything that was going on in the world at that time, we knew immediately that this was going to be critical to both support the child that was thinking about their gender identity, while at the same time educating our entire classroom community. It's really important to note that this particular group of children was older, 4 or 5. We had some boomerang students that decided to keep with us in their kindergarten year because their schools were not open in COVID. So we had already sort of set the scene for this conversation. This class of students had already been exploring identity and LGBTQ plus topics the year prior. The parent community was already receiving many emails, having meetings with teachers, explaining anti-bias curriculum. I just don't want you to think that this came out of nowhere. There was a lot of foundational work, and parents were already super on board and informed about what was going to unfold at Henry Frost and how we do our work. And that communication from leadership at the school is very important, and sometimes taking a stance. It becomes critical so your teachers feel safe to take on these topics. We can talk more about that, ask questions in the chat, because I know a lot of people are wondering, like, how do you do that? So we began to review anti-bias curriculum books, and we reached out to LGBTQ plus community members for advice. And we also started to think about complementary curriculum approach and the 4 intentions and how we can utilize them to help us prepare for what we were pretty sure we were going to be taking on. Okay, so here we are. At our planning meeting, teachers worked really diligently to see what materials we could repurpose. We repurpose like crazy. We yard sale, we take pieces apart so that we could begin our gender exploration. We looked to see what materials we had in holding, and it gave consideration really to how the materials would be presented in the classroom, and sort of that purposeful presentation to children about what the materials would be and how they were to be used. So on the next image, you can see, if you can advance that, you can see some images of how the materials were prepared for our classroom. We gathered beautiful objects that could be arranged in rainbows, more gender ambiguous dolls to play with, very difficult to find. Mattel has an amazing set. And we made sure that there were books available in our school library. We even took it upon ourselves to take our Thomas the Train set and use their sensory table as pictured below. Teachers would model the material's use and offer explanations for how they should be cared for so that we can take care of what we have and we can appreciate our materials. Next slide, please. So our teaching team began to prepare explicit presentation, as Lisa talked about, as one of our intentions, for our students to gain more in-depth knowledge about pronoun use and what it's like to be a child that is transgender. We read the book, I Am Jazz, as a community, and also we used a persona doll named Sky. Sky is a very important member of our classroom. Hey, Sky, you want to come on and see everybody? You do? Are you okay? You feel a little nervous? Sky, come say hi to everybody. Sky, what? You want me to tell them? You feel brave right now? Sky wants me to tell you that Sky is non-binary and uses the pronouns they, them. Sky loves to ride their bike. Yes, I know. Loves to play soccer and spend time with friends. Sky comes to school sometimes, right? Don't you? To have fun at choice time, to share books, and to answer questions that children might have. In this photo, Sky, do you see the photo? Do you see Teacher Claire? You remember that? Yep. In this photo, Sky came to school for the first time to be with us and to answer any questions the children might have about how it feels to be transgender. Also, Sky was the first person in our school to get COVID, and they were able to tell us all about their experience to help friends at Henry Frost not be afraid if they got 2 red lines on their nose tickle test, right? So persona dolls are really an important classroom tool that needs to be used appropriately. Oh, what? Okay, Sky's super hungry. They're going to dinner.
Hi.
They're really important classroom tools that need to be used appropriately. Sky is not a puppet and should not be touched by children in the classroom. All of the teachers need to know Sky's story and keep it consistent. They will call you out if you forget. The children never forget. Sky never has an outward voice. Rather, Sky either whispers in a teacher's ear or gestures. This technique is used so that the teacher's voice is never speaking for the persona doll. Once named, once has an identity, it does not change. Sky will be Sky. The other explicit presentation that was really important to our classroom during this time was creating the letter T for our ABC wall. And you can see it in the lower left-hand corner of the image. Our children work together as the letters unfold throughout the school year to determine what should the design be for that letter. Because of our exploration of gender, the class decided to decorate our letter T for transgender. And the children learned about trans flag, the colors, and why the colors are chosen to be as such. Next, please. Now, as this work unfolded, the war in Ukraine also started, and children started to see the Ukrainian flags all around our neighborhoods. Curious about these flags, teachers gave an explicit presentation about flags and what they stand for. In this picture, you can see a variety of flags that were important to our school community. The children were fascinated with this lesson and wanted to create their own identity flags. The children selected their own colors and designs for their flags. Each child drew things that they loved and were important to them on their flag. Children also had the choice of attaching pronoun buttons. The flags were installed on our school playground for families and guests to enjoy, and each with a written explanation from the child about what was on their flag and why it was important to them. So you can see in the image, children designing their flags, them being displayed outside, COVID-friendly way, so people could come by and visit and see them. Next, please. And we kept going. So following children's interests, it just kept going and going. The children continued to want to know more about gender, specifically gender in nature and in non-human animals. You can keep going on the slides. Thanks. So the children learn that humans are unique because we can communicate with our language, our verbal language about gender. The teachers discuss with children that sometimes sex is visible externally in animals, like cardinals, you can tell by looking at them, but sometimes you can't tell, like a squirrel. And sometimes animals are born with both sex organs, like earthworms. In this picture, you can see a sorting lesson where children and teachers thought about the categories of male, female, or both. For this lesson, teachers told stories of observations they have made about each animal. For example, I saw this painted turtle digging a hole in the soft sand and laying eggs. Or, this lion has a mane. I know from scientists that only male lions have manes, to help children determine sex of different animals. Children thought a lot about how to refer to the animals with their correct pronouns, which made them also consider how to think by extension about people in their community and world. Next, please. The children really connect things naturally because they're curious and apply what we teach them to the larger world. So as the year continued to progress, children started asking any visitors that came to the fence, came to our playground, came to our school, "Hi, my name is so-and-so. I use the pronouns they, them, or she, her, or he, him. What pronoun do you use?" And it became a very typical, natural cadence to welcoming guests in our school. Our music teacher shared the book Spork. I highly recommend this book if you haven't seen it, and some songs that our music teacher, Alistair Mook, wrote about identity. And then from there, children wanted to create spring garden gnomes and identify the gnomes' pronouns. So next slide. In summary, having the 4 intentions really was a huge help to our teaching team to tackle such an important topic and prepare curriculum with deep, purposeful intentionality. We are so proud of our school community for creating not only a foundation of understanding around this topic of gender and gender identity, but also a safe space for this to unfold in their foundational school years. We are thrilled to see how this continues to unfold in our school year after year in all the work that we do. And then the final slide, we really hope that this presentation has given you some insight to how classrooms can explore anti-bias, anti-racist curriculum in the classroom, and of course use CCA as a support for your efforts. We now are hopeful that you can ask us anything you want, from how is it going now to what do we do in our classrooms, and to Victor, how do you go about curating and preparing that vast number of access to books, and how do you vet books? You can ask anything you want. This is your chance. This is a QR code you can scan. Oh, that's okay. Hopefully people got it and it will be shared. That will take you to our website for complimentary curriculum so that you can join our monthly newsletter. And Lisa, and I know Victor and I are happy, obviously, to connect with you outside of this really amazing forum, and hope that we can support you in your efforts in these important conversations we have in our classrooms. So I think Dana's going to help us.
Yes, I invite people, if you're more comfortable asking questions in the chat, I'll be on the chat and I can feed questions to people. Otherwise, I think maybe we're a small enough group that you can just jump in and ask questions. And if that's not working, I'll start calling on people. But feel free to jump on in and ask questions.
Did you hear me? I have a question.
Go ahead.
I just want to know, depend on the age of this the kids. So when you teach that topic about like sex and gender, did you send letter to parents, or you just go in of the topic, or do you have to send a letter to the parents to let the parents know that you're gonna be teaching about that topic, or you do it?
Love the question. So important. Could I get your name and maybe if you could share where you're working right now?
I'm working for Boston Public School.
Great. It's so important to communicate with families. That homeschool partnership is really critical to our work. And even prior to that, being very clear about your school's mission and your stance outwardly has been critical for my school program. So when parents show interest in our school, we are very forthright about what we believe in and stand for. And that is a presence about when they come to open house, what they see in our classrooms. It's environmental. It's on the website as our mission statement. It's part of our application. So families aren't surprised because we present ourselves as a very forward-facing, progressive program. And so with that said, it doesn't mean that everything's so easy and so great and we can do whatever we want. We definitely, as the director of the school, have had to have very open foundations of trust first. And I could talk at length about how we create that community of trust. It starts with home visits to every family in the summer. And the way we use documentation sets a scene for safe space conversations. And it is hard sometimes as the leader of the school to take a strong stance, whether it's about gender identity and pronoun use or about how people see COVID and vaccines, to about our children really, do they need to know about war? And we hit these topics really head on in my school. And I feel like children are hearing about all of these things in the car, on the radio, and we share those quotes and that documentation demonstrating that these questions are coming directly from the children, and it's already there. They're already asking about Israel. They're already asking about why is the war not over in Ukraine? And to ignore those questions is to do a disservice to our role as educator and to the deep questions of our community. So I draft very careful emails with the support of my educators, with links to articles if it's necessary and why it's important. I offer time for private on-phone or in-person meetings with parents who are concerned. And the trust is so important because we are taking care of people's children, especially at their first school experiences, and families really are trusting us to do the right thing. And that doesn't mean that it always goes so smoothly. I've had very challenging and upsetting and oppositional exchanges, but when it's met with love and curiosity, it can really pivot things. And other times, sometimes they just don't agree. And when that happens, that's when you really got to get brave, because I have a very deep stance about when and how to do things, and I will put my foot down. But that's a different breath. And I can see the smiles, all those directors out there who've been doing this for a long time. I'm only in year 12 over here as a director. I don't know what we're going to be up against next, but this is not a time for weakness when it comes to humanity. But communication is key, always.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I hope that helps. It's not easy.
I have a question for Victor. When you're using more of a biography approach, how do you begin the lesson or the unit or the conversation? Because it seems like maybe the beginning or the introduction would be a little bit different from the approach that Lisa and Iris are using.
Yeah, so if the person actually has a book, I'm all set. That's easy. But a lot of times I have to do research. And sometimes that research will be showing a video. Sometimes that research will be just telling the person's story as sort of a storyteller, using images and visuals, sometimes pictures. Sometimes it'll just be something that came up in the room, like something's going on in the world. I think I didn't talk about Cesar Chavez in the way that that came up at the time when people were going to protests. People were going to marches already. They were already seeing these big things happening right in Boston here in the city. So it kind of came from that. So a lot of these things come from the people that I use. I look at my climate and who's in the classroom. Then I also look at what's going on in the world at that moment. And those are the people that I choose each year to think about what makes the most sense. And sometimes they get to choose. Sometimes they'll come with a person. I want to learn about this person, and then we'll go with that.
I just wanted to add, Victor, sometimes it's so hard to take on a topic that you don't feel confident about. Like I can take on Chinese New Year's till the cows come home because I'm bi-ethnic and I'm half Chinese, so I feel like I can own it. But when we did our Ruby Bridges unit here at Henry Frost, it was a lot harder for me because I'm like, how can I have this conversation when I don't actually know what this feels like? But I guess, do you have a message for teachers when they feel like, I can't do that? That's not my lived experience. That's not my race. That's not my culture. Like, what do you say to that?
Yeah, I think for me, it's more like learning about a person, whether I connect with their identity or not. I want to learn about them. So I get really excited and really wanting to learn about what it was like for them. What were their struggles? What were their challenges? And where were their victories? And for me, it's like it's doing research. And as young children, they're doing research with me. We're learning about this person together. I don't have a connection with this person, but I want to learn about them. So sort of taking that approach or that lens.
I think also thinking about what you heard today as many different entry points into the topic. Sometimes it comes directly from a child. There's a little spark there. There's a little ember. Sometimes it comes from your observations of what children are doing. Sometimes it comes from current events. Sometimes it comes from books that you have that you feel are important for children to know about. But the bottom line is that you have to do your own research at every corner. You could hear that from Victor. You could hear that from Iris of, so what is the rainbow flag and why is it made of these colors and who started that? And how do we bring that into the classroom so that we're always giving children meaning behind what they're doing? It's not about covering a topic, it's about uncovering the topic with the children.
I was wondering if the three of you or one of the three of you could talk a little bit about what it looks like when there are no materials for what you want to do. I think things are getting so much better, but I have this really strong memory of about 10 years ago trying to dismantle and talk about Thanksgiving in my classroom and realizing there at that point were no books that retold the story. And one of the kids saying, why are there no books for us that tell us the truth? Can you guys talk a little bit about the work? What does that look like if you are encountering something and you say, I don't have anything in my classroom, I don't have, what does that look like?
Gosh, I've been doing this a long time, and Iris and Victor I'm sure this will resonate with you, but I remember like having a beautiful book about Thanksgiving and changing all the text. Like the pictures were actually beautiful. And I didn't read any of the text that was in that book because it didn't tell the truth about what was happening, right? So I had to modify, I had to think about what's the story that must be told and how can I use the materials that I have. And it also meant not using some things. So more than like, oh, what do I have? I don't have those. Sometimes people will think like, I don't have those dolls that Iris had. If I don't have those dolls or that book, then I can't do any of this. Well, actually you can, because part of your job as an educator is to be a storyteller. Yeah, Beth is saying she made her own songs. Exactly. I'm like, you know what? Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Everybody knows the tune. I will make up a song to anything I need to this archetypal tune that kids will be able to sing along to. And so it's about, okay, there are plenty of images that I don't want to show to kids of happy Christopher Columbus coming with the ships in these cartoon characters that kids are going to color. If that's all I had. So, you know, for Columbus Day. So I had no choice. I had to use those. Actually, you do have a choice to eliminate some of those and bring in your own stories and your own materials. And sometimes you have to be really resourceful. Like, it's not just about opening Lakeshore catalog and hoping that they're going to have what you need.
Just to add on to that, I love the discussion of make your own songs if they don't exist, make your own book if it doesn't exist. I mean, I keep having little mini traumas thinking about what we did in COVID. There's no nose tickle test, Lakeshore kit from school discount supply. Like, we are teachers. We know what it means to yard sale and repurpose. We roll with the best of them. So, you know, that we were creating things from what we had and repurposing things and using our persona doll to make things that are critical happen. And puppetry, I love puppets. Like, my time at Children's Workshop taught me a lot about not a persona doll use, but a puppet, and how that can open up conversations and a flexibility in no other way. Dramatic play, repurposing materials. And just because it came as a kit doesn't mean it needs to stay as a kit. We basically take Playmobil sets and dismantle and use the Playmobil bus to recreate Ruby Bridges or those Fisher-Price buses, and it becomes something totally that the company did not intend. And we love it, because once you have that kind of flexibility of mind with materials, you actually don't need to buy more stuff. You just need to think about how you can use it differently. And that's fun.
Lisa, you put social stories in the chat. Will you talk a little bit about social stories and how you use them?
Sure. Iris gave a beautiful demonstration. It's actually the exact demonstration that we do in social stories workshops. And I just put a link to the Somerville Early Education website. Before I left, we built that website as a repository for all kinds of curriculum materials, but there's some really nice anti-bias resources there. The link will take you to the anti-bias, but it takes you directly to persona dolls, which are, you know, large dolls, as Iris said, that kids don't play with, that you write the story for, depending on what you need in your classroom in order to help children to form relationships potentially with people who are different from them, or to represent somebody who has a connection to somebody or many of the children in your classroom. When I was at Elliott Pearson, the majority of my classroom were biracial children. And so my persona doll, Nick, was biracial, and that was part of his story. And as Iris described it beautifully, like, it's not a doll they play with, it's a member of the classroom. The doll doesn't talk in a pretend voice that you might culturally misappropriate a voice or an accent. The doll speaks through you. And then you speak to the children, and the children speak to the doll. So it becomes an ongoing part of using the doll to solve problems that are going on in the classroom and to encourage children to share their own stories. So they're very simple, and there's some easy resources that you can access to learn how to use them. But Iris, you gave just a beautiful presentation on how you would use a persona doll. And the first piece is to introduce the doll to the children. So you tell the children, I have somebody you'll want to meet. Doll, this is Sky. Let me tell you, Sky's going to tell a story, and I'll tell a little bit about Sky. And then you introduce them. Pretty soon, like, everyone believes that Sky is a real person, and you're never pretending that Sky is real, right? There's a tacit agreement between you and the children. They know Sky's a doll. Like, we're not pretending that Sky is human. It's a tool to support children's understanding of identity, diversity, justice, and action.
I just wanted to share too, while we're waiting for more questions to come, that Sky this year is going to be tackling Maui fires, because Sky's family member is from Hawaii, and that's where we're headed into this sort of season of giving and thinking about those action-oriented motivators for children, that what can we do when someone in our school community needs support and something really, really hard has happened. And the safety of being able to ask questions shifts when it is in our classroom and with Sky. And Sky has their own wardrobe. Sky has gear, winter gear. You can really take it to the next level. And obviously we've taken it to the next level here, but Sky just is fabulous. And they love to see what they're going to wear next, because you just don't know. Sky could come to lunch. We could see Sky's lunchbox. It's so fun. Yeah. So I'm curious if other teachers have any strategies who are on this call, or things that they're interested in taking on after hearing us share our work at our programs. And I think as an educator who's worked for other people, it's really hard unless you know your director, your school's sort of stance. You can use this as the conversation starter and say, you know, last night I jumped onto this Lesley call and I'm really curious. They brought up some heavy hitter conversations, and what would you say about me taking on, you know, some of the upcoming topics, whether it's from the, you know, whether it's Thanksgiving or upcoming holidays, and feel it out and see, because a lot of teachers that we train are sort of hesitant because they're not sure what their boss would say, but it's a great entry point to having those conversations and finding out, you know, what could I do? What thing could I change in my classroom? And you can start small. You don't have to have a blowout meeting about pronoun use. It doesn't have to go that big so fast, but where can I start to push the edges a little bit? And where can I start to feel confident in bringing these conversations into the classroom with anti-bias work? I think I see a hand. Beth.
Hi, sorry, I might not be looking at you because I have a crazy setup with my laptop. My question is, so I'm by myself for one thing. I teach preschool in Western Massachusetts. It's a very white community. I'm Jewish, so I bring a lot of Judaism into the program, even though none of the other kids are. And I struggle with where to start when the kids aren't bringing things to me. So like I have a lot of multiracial materials. In fact, I'm outside all of the time, and all the baby dolls outside are African-American or Hispanic. Like I definitely have a variety outside. Books, I always have, I wrote down all the books that you brought forth, but I struggle with the idea of when do I bring it into the classroom, and I would never shy away from it if they brought it up. And I do talk about Martin Luther King, but then they never bring up race. And then I'm like, so how do I get there? Like, because I don't want to necessarily put it in their heads that I struggle with that a lot. I want to support it. I want them to be kind, and they are. We work on community a lot in this classroom, and I create a really strong community of respect with materials, with each other. I do a lot of independence in this classroom. There's a lot of choice. They really, they're telling me what materials they want for art and for toys, and they do make a lot of choices. But I also do some directed stuff at times. Like I read them about Rosh Hashanah. I told them when I closed for Yom Kippur, I said, this is my thinking day. I think about the past year and how I can be a better teacher. And so just in very much early childhood terms, and obviously, as you mentioned before, I'm comfortable because I'm Jewish. So I need to, but I want to come out of that a little bit more. So help.
Victor, I'm waiting for you. This is right up your alley.
So, I talked about Rabbi Abraham Herschel, and he was best friends with Martin Luther King Jr. So, you already have a link. You've talked about Martin Luther King Jr. They know about him. So this would be a great segue. And he's this Jewish rabbi who, really believed in social justice, really believed in civil rights, telling his story and making those kind of connections. I think just finding something that you're passionate about, something that excites you, something you want to learn about, and bringing that into the classroom, and they'll see your excitement. I'm so glad that you're bringing your Judaism. That's so important. So it's great for them because they're seeing you. But you can also say, oh, I'm really excited about this person. I want to teach you about this person. Let's learn about this person together. And that way it doesn't feel like you're pushing an agenda or that you're trying to force something down their throat. It's something like you're learning together and you're excited about this person together. That's sort of where I go. And as far as working on race, and I would do something around skin color, because even, if you have all white kids, right? All their shades of skin are different. Some are a light tan, some are a pinkish, and you're still going to be able to talk about skin. You're still going to be able to have that shade conversation, even if all the kids are white. And then they get to see that not just everyone's white and black too, right? There are different shades, and there are great books about that. I have some. So
There's a great book called Two Eyes, a Nose, and a Mouth, and they're beautiful photographs of different faces. And it really explores not only skin tone, but also all the amazing shapes and that come with our eye color and nose shapes and mouth shapes and old and young. And we can find such a variety in so many things, whether it's in nature or in our own bodies as natural extensions. And we steer the ship in our classrooms so that even if it's not as front facing, if the questions aren't coming verbally, watch how the children play. What are they doing? And how much time do we have? I'm going to share a really quick story that was nonverbal just because it really made an impression. I was working in a lab school when I kicked off and Lisa and I met, and I was really watching children wash babies in the sensory table. And being the good anti-bias people we had, your Barney set. We had the white baby, the black baby, the Asian baby. They're all in the bubbles. And we're like, look at us. We're so great. We have diverse babies in the sensory table ready to get scrubbed and washed. The children said nothing, but I observed one child washing the black doll over and over and over again. And it took an observation and a prompt. I've noticed you are really working hard on washing this baby. Child still doesn't answer. I go and do something else, help a kid who's fighting over blocks, come back. Child still there, washing and washing. You know where I'm going with this, right? So the child said, but Teacher Iris, the baby is still dirty. So what I'm saying is it might not be a verbal request. It might be an action. It could be a curiosity because, all of us know as early educators, half the stuff we do and we anticipate is nonverbal. So watch very carefully, especially if you work with really young children. What are they preferencing in the room? Why? I've noticed that when children go to the dollhouse, everyone wants this doll. There's a big fight. We have to do the timer all the time. Why? Why? Tell me. Bring it to the meeting. Ask, what is it about this particular and you're going there because it happens early. And in books too, I have had so many books that I grew up with that I was so emotionally attached to. And like Lisa says, you got to let it go. So I actually tell the children, Teacher Iris was cleaning out the bookshelf. And I have to tell you, there's some books that aren't going to be in our school anymore. Why, Teacher Iris? Richard Scarry. I had so many issues getting rid of Richard Scarry. You're laughing. You know why. I'm like, look at this. All of the she, hers in this book are all in the house wearing a dress. I'm like, what do you think about that? So you can use it as a provocation. So those are just little snippets of what unfolds. And I think I'm really glad, Beth, that you shared out because that's how I felt for a long time too. Like, can't go there. I don't celebrate Diwali. What if I screw this up? And then the kids think about Diwali completely wrong forever. Better not do it. No, we got to let that go and take it on and try and admit we sing teacher mistake, and it happens. Sometimes I might slip and say that Sky is she, her. And I have to own it. And I have to show it that it's okay to make mistakes and that we keep trying.
Yeah, you're gonna make mistakes in this work, and that's how you learn. And it's kids are very forgiving. Like, and you can come and explain, like, oh, I had the wrong information, or I misgendered somebody. Did you notice that? And you get to talk to them about it. So then they'll feel comfortable also making mistakes with things that they find difficult or can't figure out. So modeling is so important. You don't have to have it all figured out to do this work.
I definitely don't have it all figured out, full disclosure.
No, at all. Neither.
And I don't want to, because it would be pretty boring. We got to keep trying and fighting forward, you know, and there's going to be new challenges at every turn, but there's no year that's the same. There's no group of children that's the same. And oh, I wanted to add too, neurodiverse learners. It's not something you can always see. So there's always entry points for this work. We say all the time, so-and-so is working on this and so-and-so is working on that. We are all working on something, because our brains and our bodies and who we are so wonderful. And that's what we're trying to figure out, is what do you need to do your best work? Yeah, Sharon, you're already doing it. That's amazing. Oh, that's such a good example in the chat. Exactly.
Great.
I was wondering, before we wrap up for the evening, and this is a big ask, but if people are thinking about getting started, like the first step that you would make, I think I often get questions from students like, wait, how do I overhaul my whole curriculum? If each of you had to pick one thing, start here, what would be one thing that you would say would be a great place to start?
My first thought is look at your classroom library, look at your books, and the same books, as Iris was saying, you've been using for years. Sometimes they're not so great. Sometimes they got stuff in them that you don't see. So if you actually, with your team, start really looking at your books, and I know Lewis Thurman Sparks has a checklist for that. That's a great place to begin. And you can sort of have a shelf of books that are just maybe about stereotypes, and use those books for stereotypes. You can have books that are just that you feel really comfortable with, or maybe there's a book that you're maybe even scared of that you might need help with reading. And so you can sort of figure out why you're needing support with that book. That's why I started making the slides of books with questions next to them and sort of narration, so you know what you're getting into, so you can sort of practice with your coworkers on how to read these books and how to answer those questions, and sort of just have the descriptions right there for you, so you're not caught off guard. So that's where I'd begin.
We look at our materials all the time. Like, the next step from books is really look hard at what you give children access to in your classroom environments. And if your dollhouse set does not have an array of diversity, do something about it. And if the Duplo people are all out there and they're all white, or your Lego people are all out there and they're all yellow, or whatever they're doing, figure out how to make it deeply intentional, the materials your children put their hands on. And think about gendered toys, think about the messaging when you give the explicit presentation, and what you model in your whole body when you give those explicit presentations. And all of it matters, because what you value and the message you send, they're watching every move. So we've had to, we're all so cheap. We like pulling stuff out of nowhere, but if the set doesn't demonstrate your goals, then it shouldn't be in the classroom.
And I would add that another place to start is with the adults. I think about that concept of the prepared adult. Find people to talk with about this, and start with your own identity. So how are you going to talk about your own identity with your colleagues, so that you can begin to explore what it means to think about identity, diversity, justice, and action in your own life. And it will really help prepare you to talk about these things with young children.
Thank you all so much for such a wonderful presentation. You have me desperately wanting to get back into my classroom to do more of this work with my own students. We just really appreciate it, and having everyone together this evening too. I'm going to turn things over to Meg to close us out for the evening.
Thank you, Dana. I just noticed one question in the chat about how to get the certificate for the session. Did you want to talk to folks about that, or?
You will get an email with a certificate within the next couple of days. Everyone who has registered, it will get sent to your email. So, and that'll be signed and certified with the 2 hours of time that you spent this evening.
Thank you. So on that note, we want to just say thank you to our 3 wonderful speakers, Iris, Lisa, and Victor. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all of you for attending and giving us this time in your evening. This was really inspiring and informative, and we're just so thrilled that you were all able to join us. So have a wonderful evening, and thank you again. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. That was a great workshop.